Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz wrote the book, The Case Against Impeaching President Trump. How are you, sir? Good day to you, and thank you for being here today. Tell us what it means based on what your understanding so far.
Well, I've read the indictment, and it's a typical Mueller indictment. Very, very heavy on stories involving collusion and WikiLeaks. But the indictment itself all relates to obstruction of justice, tampering of witnesses. In other words, crimes that occurred as a result of the investigation. This is typical of Mueller. He has found almost no crimes that occurred before he was appointed special counsel. He was appointed special counsel to uncover crimes that had already occurred. He has virtually failed in that respect in every regard. Almost all of his crimes that he's indicted people for are crimes that resulted from his investigation. False statements, tampering with witnesses, obstruction of justice. I went through today the list of all the people who had been indicted by Mueller, and it was very hard to find any American who had been charged with any crime that occurred before Mueller was appointed special counsel. So what's happened here is these are crimes that are generated by the investigation. It doesn't make them any less criminal, but it really means that there's been a failure to uncover the basic crimes for which he was appointed, namely, before he was appointed, was there illegal collusion, illegal conspiracy with Russia? We don't find that. In this indictment, he tells stories about alleged collusion, stories about WikiLeaks, but that's not the basis for the indictment. The basis for the indictment are all events that occurred after he was appointed. That's very significant.
All right, Professor, the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, just spoke to the Washington Post, and they asked what was the president's reaction to this, what he learned about Roger Stone's happened at his house this morning. He said he wouldn't comment specifically on the president's reaction, but he did say the president said he's not nervous about the Stone indictment. Should the president in any way be nervous about this?
There are two reasons why somebody might be nervous. Number one, whether he's implicated in the indictment itself. The answer to that is clearly no. The second is whether or not Stone has been indicted in order to squeeze him into testifying. As Judge Ellis, who presided over the Manafort case, said, the object of these arrests is not to get people like Manafort or people like Stone. It's to get them to sing and perhaps even to compose, to create guilt allegations against the real target here, the president. So the president should be worried every time somebody who he knew or had any acquaintance with is arrested, because according to Judge Ellis, the purpose of these arrests is not to get that person, but to get that person to provide information or testimony against the real target, the president. That's the tactic Mueller has used from day one. As a civil libertarian, it's a very disturbing tactic. It's all too common among prosecutors, but it's very disturbing. What prosecutors do all the time is they threaten people. They say, if you don't testify, we're going to put you in jail, your family in jail. Now, people object to the fact that Trump and Giuliani made alleged threats against Cohen's family, and that's wrong if that happened. But it's also wrong when prosecutors do the same thing. Prosecutors tamper with witnesses all the time. The difference is it's legal for a prosecutor to threaten somebody that unless they become a witness and testify according to what the prosecution wants them to testify, they will prosecute them, their relatives, their friends, and their associates. It's a double standard of injustice.
Let's go through a couple of things here that's just developed over the last 2 hours. First of all, Sarah Sanders, she was on CNN earlier today and responded this way to the initial arrest.
Look, my first reaction is real simple. This has nothing to do with the president and certainly nothing to do with the White House. This is something that has to do solely with that individual and not something that affects us here in this building.
Okay, so that was from this morning. I want to take you back 2 days now. Roger Stone was on with Tucker, and part of his commentary went like this at the end. Watch.
You have a runaway special prosecutor who is accountable to no one. The House Intelligence Committee Democrats keep insisting that I have perjured myself. That's a lie. My testimony is both accurate and truthful, but I'm not even allowed to have a copy of it.
So let's see what comes of that at 11 a.m. But the first part of that statement, you have a runaway special prosecutor. Just listening to you talk, I think that's what you believe. And now you remember when Manafort was arrested at 5 o'clock in the morning? He and his wife were in bed. You remember the reporting on that? Well, this morning, guns drawn on behalf of the FBI, 6 a.m. Local time, and apparently there was a TV crew of some type that was there as well. I don't know how that happens, but just put that together when you're making the case that these are process crimes, but yet they're being arrested in a very heavy-handed way. Go.
Of course, normally the situation is you call the lawyer, you tell the lawyer, look, he's been indicted, please show up at the federal court tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and maybe they keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't run away. But in cases like this, you don't typically see arrests of this kind. Look, Rudy Giuliani himself is guilty of having done that. You remember the case back when he went after Goldman Sachs executive and had him handcuffed and arrested in the Goldman Sachs office, and then it turned out there was no case to be brought against him. So this is something that prosecutors do a lot in order to intimidate witnesses. When they want to get people to testify, they're very heavy-handed, and they make the point very clearly, this is not about you. You can save yourself, your family, your friends. Just give us what we want to hear about the president. That's why the president always has to be a little nervous, even though these are not allegations relating to him. It's against a person who may have information relating to him. Stone doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who's going to easily cooperate, but well, look, when you're facing long prison term, the most loyal of people turn to themselves and say, I have to look out for myself first.
That makes this tweet very important then. This goes back to December 3rd, 2018, Professor, in which the president tweeted out, quote, quoting Roger Stone, I will never testify against Trump. The president went on to write, this statement was recently made by Roger Stone, essentially stating that he will not be forced by a rogue and out-of-control prosecutor to make up lies and stories about President Trump. Nice to know that some people still have guts. How will those words play out?
Well, well, you know, they're going to allege that that's obstruction of justice, that he's tampering with a witness, telling the witness not to testify, encouraging him not to testify. That's a very, very weak charge. You don't obstruct justice in public by sending out tweets. But look, Cohen said he would never testify against Trump. He would take a bullet for him. And now look what's happened. So you never know what's going to happen when a person is arrested for a myriad of crimes, as you described it, process crimes. Those are serious crimes. But when you look at the scorecard of how many crimes this special prosecutor has uncovered against Americans that occurred before he was appointed and that relate to the Russia probe, you really have to say it's been a very disappointing investigation. If the best you can do is essentially create crimes by your investigation, which is what has happened here, that doesn't exculpate the people who have really lied or really obstructed justice, but it tells you something important about the investigation itself.
Okay. Some people believe with this action against Stone that Mueller's closer to the end. Are you in that school, or do you know?
We don't know. We know he's convened or extended grand juries. One would hope he would be closer to the end. We know he was waiting for the election, and that's over. And I would expect that before the summer we would see an end. And again, I would hope, in fairness, that when his report is completed, the new Attorney General, hopefully you'll be sworn in by then, Barr, will look at the report, give a copy to Giuliani and the rest of the Trump team, say, now you have a chance to rebut that, and we'll simultaneously produce the two reports so the American public can see what the prosecution has to say and what the defense has to say and make up its own mind as to who's right. That's only fair.
What do you expect to happen or go down in this federal courtroom?
Oh, it's going to be just technical. They're going to ask him if he pleads not guilty. He's going to say he pleads not guilty. He doesn't need a lawyer appointed. He had his own lawyer. Bail will be given. It'd be interesting what the prosecution asks for in terms of bail. or whether they ask for a remand, because if they arrested him, they must think or claim to think that he's a danger of flight or something else. So it would be the only interesting thing. We'll see what approach the prosecutor has toward his remaining at liberty pending the rest of the case. We saw Manafort was ultimately remanded as a result of alleged misconduct while he was out on bail. So that's the important thing to look to.
We've got to run up, but we've got 100 more questions, and apologize we're out of time here. But again, the indictment says that he was in touch with WikiLeaks and not the Russians. That's quite clear. Do you know?
No. It doesn't. But it doesn't allege it. It doesn't allege it. That's not the crime. That's part of the story. That's the important thing.
Interesting.
It's part of the story. That's not alleged as a crime, so it doesn't have to be proved at trial. It's like just writing something, scribbling something on the wall of a bathroom, accusing somebody of something. There's no opportunity to rebut that because it's not charged as a crime.
Okay,
that's
so
important. The storytelling part of this is just storytelling.
I just want to get to this last question. Stone's been saying for 2 years that he's likely to be indicted. Why does it take 2.5 years to get to this point? How come?
Well, there may have been a sealed indictment for a while. We don't know the answer to that question, but they were probably trying to build up the case. And they didn't want a 1-count or a 2-count. They wanted, a 7-count indictment. So it takes some time to do that. And maybe they were negotiating behind the scenes. We don't know that. There's no evidence of that. But that sometimes happens, and negotiations break down, so the indictment comes forward.
Thank you, sir.
But
it's good to have you on today.
We ought to look very hard at this indictment and distinguish between the crimes and the stories.
Alan Dershowitz, thank you, live in Florida today. Thank you, sir. We'll talk again.
Thank you, Professor.
Let's get back to that Fox News alert. Roger Stone arrested following an indictment, we're told that was yesterday, but he's just arrested this morning. Indictment by a federal grand jury as part of special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Stone being charged with obstruction, 5 counts of giving false statements, as well as witness tampering. So what does this mean for the investigation? Here to weigh in, journalist and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, Lee Smith. Good morning, Lee.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here with these breaking news. Let's just start simply with, what do you think this means for Mueller's investigation?
Well, I'm of the opinion, I know that lots of people believe that Mueller, the Mueller investigation is about to wrap up anytime soon. He may be moving to a final, maybe moving to wrapping it up with a final report. I think that this suggests that it's unlikely that the investigation is going to be coming to an end anytime soon. I mean, I have to say I have no insight into these particular charges, but looking at the history of this investigation, and let's remember that the Mueller probe is a continuation of the FBI's investigation into the Trump team, which started by the end of July 2016. And if we look how this investigation, if we look how the FISA warrant on Carter Page was obtained, and if we look at what happened under the Mueller investigation, I think that this investigation is an enormous problem. I think it's compromised at its source.
But meanwhile, the indictments move forward, compromised or not. So I think my next question would be, what does this tell us about the investigation itself? Is it getting to collusion? Because we haven't seen Russian collusion, which is where all of this started, yet. Right. So, Stone has repeatedly said any contact he had with WikiLeaks and others was incidental, and that it was not part of some coordinated effort.
Right. I mean, what I mean when I say the investigation is compromised at the source, let's remember what this is based on. This is based on the Steele dossier. This was a piece of opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Now, as it turns out, senior FBI and senior DOJ officials knew this from the outset. They knew where it came from. We also know that the number 2 at DOJ, Sally Yates at the time, and the number 2 at the FBI, Andrew McCabe, they signed off on this. They signed off on the FISA warrant. They knew what it was about. They knew where it was coming from. They knew it was based on the Steele dossier. Other officials there knew it was that had been paid for by the Clinton campaign.
Sure.
This is the place where we find that collusion is charged.
Right.
It's only an opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign.
I've got less than 30 seconds.
There is no other source for charges of collusion.
Right.
This is what the Mueller probe is based on.
And that's led a lot of people to say that this is poisonous fruit coming from that tree, because the investigation was sort of a sham from the start, as you suggest. But I've got less than 30 seconds. So are these process crimes? People still, even if the investigation started unfairly or under improper terms, you still have to tell the truth to the FBI. You still cannot tamper with witnesses.
Yes, you have to tell the truth. Again, as I said, I have no particular insight into these charges right now. But what I am saying, what I do believe is that the Mueller investigation right now is being used as a political instrument against the president, against the administration, and also it's being used as an attack, as an instrument against an American institution, an election. The American people elected Donald Trump. They did not elect Robert Mueller as a fourth branch of government to continue to attack the election.
Well, we'll see what Mueller's next move is. We'll see whether the president's reacting on Twitter soon. In the meantime, Lee Smith, it's important to have your analysis this morning. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.